Hi, my name's Eris. I was 32 when I stood at my parents' front porch, holding my newborn with shaking arms, begging for help. They looked me in the eye and said, "You made this mess. Don't drag us into it." Then, they slammed the door. No food, no heat, no crib. I rocked my baby to sleep in a motel bathroom, whispering lullabies over the sound of leaking pipes. And years later, after courtrooms, lies, betrayal, guess who came knocking, saying they missed us? What kind of family shuts the door on you when you're drowning, only to show up when you've learned how to swim? I never thought I'd be the kind of person pacing in front of someone else's door, heart thudding like it's going to betray me, yet here I am, clutching threads of hope and calculating every breath. Portland's late autumn chill crept through the branches of bare maple trees, leaves surrendered long ago, the wind whispering secrets I wasn't ready to hear. It was Thanksgiving night, 2020, and Mama's hardwood floors gleamed under candlelight when I walked in carrying my rumpled coat and the news I'd rehearsed for hours. I paused in the foyer, the smell of roasted turkey and stuffing mingling with sweet pumpkin pie wafting from the kitchen. My stomach curled. Hope sat heavy in my chest, knotting every muscle. If I spoke softly enough, maybe no one would reject me. Isolde, my big sister, sat poised at the table, her dress pressed, hair pinned. Mother hovered, watching the doors hinge. Father, silent as always, eyes focused on the news segment playing faintly on the living room TV. "Happy Thanksgiving," I said, voice shaking just a little. Smiles flashed, polite, but not warm. I lingered at the edge of the table, hands clasped in front of me. The mashed potatoes, green beans, rolls. They looked like a promise of belonging that I didn't feel. I placed my plate beside Father's chair, nodded at Isolde. She lifted her eyes, cold shock on her face. I swallowed. Halfway through the dinner, while steam curled off each dish, I cleared my throat. I have something to tell you." Their forks paused, knives lowered almost imperceptibly. I breathed. "I'm pregnant." My words dropped into the room like a stone. Isolde set down her fork with a snap. Her gaze sharpened. "Again?" she said. "You're always making reckless decisions." The word always cut me deeper than any knife. Mother's lips pressed together. She turned away, clasped her napkin. "Do you even know who the father is?" Her voice, tight and distant, sounded heavy with disappointment. Father didn't speak, only swallowed. His jaw worked. He looked to the window, rain beginning to tap against the panes. I heard a rush in my ears, like everything outside. The wind, the rain, the creaking of the house drowned out what was supposed to matter. Disbelief spread through me. Betrayal. Isolation. I lowered my eyes, the warmth in the room turning thin. That night, I walked down their walkway to the front porch. Mother's boots behind the screen door. I could see her shadow. I clasped my coat around me as though it might shield me. "Mama," I whispered. "Can we talk? Alone?" Her breathing echoed. The door shuddered, but it didn't open. Instead came cold words. "You made this mess. Don't drag us into it." The screen door clicked shut. Light inside flickered. I stood numb. My stomach dropped. My baby kicked faintly inside me. I hugged myself, the neon glow of the porch light casting long shadows. Rain started, soaking the hem of my coat. I let it wash my cheeks as I turned away. Hope shrank somewhere in me, cracking. I walked home in darkness, the road slick, orange streetlights reflecting my own unwanted, unwelcome reflections. Weeks later, when labor came, it came without anyone beside me. No sister holding my hand. No mother's voice. Just the harsh smell of antiseptic and the hum of machines. Nurses glanced my file, whispered in corners. Every contraction told me I was alone, yet I pushed. Pain carved its way through me. Loneliness wrapped around my ribs. I thought of Isolde's baby shower last summer. Laughter, lemonade, dangling fairy lights. I had stood in a floral dress, clapping, pretending jealousy wasn't rising when Isolde lit candles, kissed her husband, everyone cheering. Now, I gripped the hospital sheets, breathing between contractions, trying not to remember how fast she sent pictures, how my invitation had hung in my closet, untouched. Hours passed. Dawn leaked pale through curtains. I held her, a fragile pink thing. Her first cry sounded like a defiance. Her skin smelled like wound and hope. No one walked through the door. No footsteps. The room echoed with empty spaces, where family should have stood, where love should have reached. I cleaned her cheeks with my shaking hand. She opened her eyes, blinking slowly. Tiny lashes, tiny fingers curled around air. She looked at me, her mother, and for an instant, I saw something. Trust? Innocence? Then she burrowed into the blanket, quiet. I whispered, "You're all I have now," and meant it. I wrapped her in my arms, looked at the ceiling, the sterile lights above, the clock ticking. Outside the window, colors of autumn were fading, branches exposed. The world may have turned cold, unforgiving, but I'd carry warmth in her heartbeat. That night, as I stared into her tiny eyes, I realized I wasn't just alone. I was unwanted. I watched her fall asleep, one tiny fist curled near her mouth, the other resting on my chest. Outside the hospital window, frost began to form delicate fingers on the glass. I wanted to believe I could stop time in that moment, keep her safe, quiet, untouched. But reality has a way of crawling back in, cold and sharp-edged. 2 days later, discharged with only a flannel blanket from the donation bin and a half-empty canister of formula, I stepped out into the Portland chill. The air bit at my skin. My coat didn't zip anymore, stretched and worn thin. Holding her close, I made my first call, then another, and another. No answer. Just voicemail after voicemail. My mother, my sister, even Dad's old number, out of service. "Hi, it's me. Eris. I had her. She's here. We're out of the hospital now. I just need some help. Formula, maybe diapers. Just for a week." I spoke low, trying not to sound too desperate, too broken. Then I hung up, the beep trailing behind like an echo of a door slamming shut again. 3 days passed. No reply. I checked my phone like a nervous tick, rereading my texts even though I knew no one had seen them. Then, one morning, just after I'd changed her on a folded towel in my tiny studio apartment, my phone buzzed. "Isolde, you need to learn accountability." Accountability? I stared at the screen, trying to process. My baby cooed softly behind me, unaware that someone had just sentenced us to isolation with a 7-word message. That was all they thought I needed. A lesson. Like pain hadn't already taught me enough. The next afternoon, a knock on the door startled me. My heart leapt with foolish hope. Maybe someone had changed their mind. But all that lay on my doorstep was a large manila envelope. My name scribbled in tight cursive, the top corner already torn. I opened it carefully. Inside was a letter, typed, neat, sterile. To whom it may concern, this letter serves to clarify that the current situation is the sole responsibility of Eris. Financially, emotionally, and legally, she must own the consequences of her choices. This family is not liable nor willing to provide support at this time. Signed, Mother Father Isolde. No love. No warmth. Just ink. Smudged in one corner, where my trembling thumb had touched it. I stood frozen, knees weakening. They'd signed me away like an old debt. I don't remember walking out the door or the bus ride that took me across town, but I do remember the cold metal of their gate when I arrived. It squeaked under my grip. I pressed the intercom, heart racing. My baby stirred, wrapped tight in a second-hand blanket from Goodwill. Her cheeks red from wind. It was Isolde who opened the door. She didn't step out. She stood there like a wall, arms crossed, eyebrows lifted. "Eris," she said flatly, "you can't just show up." "I'm not asking you to raise her," I replied, my voice steady even though my hands shook. "I'm asking for warmth. Just one night. It's cold." She didn't move. My mother stepped into view behind her. Her eyes scanned me like a stranger on the sidewalk. "You had choices," she said. "You chose this." I chose to keep my child, I replied, almost spitting. I chose love. Mother didn't blink. Love without responsibility is just drama, Eris. You always loved creating messes. She turned away. The door closed, softer this time. No slamming, just final. I stood there, heartbeat roaring in my ears. My baby whimpered. I rocked her, legs stiff from cold. I didn't cry, yet. I just walked, slowly, to the nearest bus stop. The route back home was delayed. I ducked into a nearby grocery store, hoping the heat might buy us a few moments of comfort. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed. People moved around like we were invisible. I stood near the back wall, next to a freezer of pre-made dinners. That's when it broke. My resolve, my breath, the dam holding everything back. My knees gave way, and I slid down beside the freezer, clutching my daughter as if she were all that tethered me to earth. And then, out of nowhere, a voice. "Sweetheart," it said gently. I looked up. A woman, maybe mid-60s, wrapped in a wool coat, stood above me, her eyes kind, worn. "I'm fine," I whispered, wiping my face with my sleeve. She didn't respond right away, just crouched beside me, unzipped a tote bag, and handed me a thermos. "It's chicken soup," she said. "I made too much. My husband's gone now, so I always make too much." I hesitated. She smiled, not waiting for me to take it. She placed it next to me. "Sometimes," she said softly, "it's the people with nothing who give the most." Then she stood and walked away. I sat there, stunned, holding the warm thermos. It wasn't just soup, it was proof the world hadn't gone entirely cold. That night, back in my apartment, after rocking my daughter to sleep and feeding her what little I had left, I pulled out a notebook, one I hadn't touched since high school. I wrote, "Dear me, you are not disposable, you are not invisible. One day, you'll need no one to survive. Until then, cry if you must, but don't stop walking. E." I closed the notebook, placed it on the windowsill. The city outside flickered in amber and violet. My daughter stirred in her sleep. I whispered to no one in particular. Silence isn't peaceful if it comes from abandonment. I no longer feared pain. Pain taught me how to speak. But silence was what I had to unlearn. But pain doesn't just echo. It builds until one day it roars. That night, as I stared into her tiny eyes, I realized I wasn't just alone. I was unwanted. Morning came dripping gray light through the thin curtain of my studio room above a closed-down shop. I dressed quietly, tried to eat half a piece of toast without choking on my thoughts. My daughter slept on folded blankets beside me, chest rising slowly. The hunger in my stomach was dull compared to the ache in my chest. By late morning, I was pushing open the door of my old Toyota Camry, parked 2 blocks from a laundromat. The engine gurgled hesitantly. It didn't run often now, but it was shelter, and for today, enough. I buckled her in, formula can rattling, dirt smudges on the dash. The heater barely worked. The frost inside the windshield forced me to breathe against the cold, fog the glass with my own breath, see only halos of street lamps and other cars passing by. The world was visible. I just felt cut off. Some days I filled the tank with change, nickel by nickel at the gas station, praying the car battery wouldn't die before I found somewhere warmer. I counted every purchase, those little things, coffee, diapers, formula, each one a bet that I might make it through another 24 hours. Hunger taught me patience. The cold taught me how to watch and wait without making noise. One afternoon, I trudged into a church food pantry. My gloves damp from melted snow, my nose runny. I imagined the looks from others, pity, judgment, and tried to brace myself. The volunteer behind the desk, a woman with kind wrinkles and eyes that had seen loss, handed me more than I asked. Extra canned beans, a loaf of bread, fruit. I shook. "Thank you," I said, voice cracking. "That's enough." But tears pricked, embarrassment and relief tangled together. I packed everything into a small bag. Outside, I pulled the scarf tighter, caught my own reflection in a shop window. I looked tired, thinner, but not defeated. I needed those moments, just small patches of kindness, to know I hadn't been erased completely. Evening dragged in fast. I fell asleep holding her, curled in the passenger seat of the Camry, heater off, engine cold, head resting against the window, the world muffled and distant. In sleep, I dreamed of our house, the one I grew up in, warm wood smells, her laughter, Isolde hanging ornaments. Then the dream shifted. Curtains closed, mother's stern face, doors locked. I woke, heart pounding. Outside, snow started, soft, relentless flakes landing on windshield wipers. I wiped a slash across the glass, hands shaking, and felt her stir in my arms. The cold was deeper now, bone deep. I held her closer. Later, I walked into the city library to charge my phone. The long tables, the quiet whisper of pages, they felt like refuge. I sat in the back corner, baby sleeping in my lap. Phone at 10%. I watched the clock on the wall moving slow. I thought about the night I stood on Mama's porch, holding her inside me, and then outside her house. When Mother saw me through the glass, soaked, carrying life, and called 911 instead of opening the door, I thought of Isolde's contempt, the way she folded into the role of judge so fast. My body still remembers the rain, my skin remembers the cold. But my heart is learning something new. Hope. In that library, a woman in her late 60s walked past, saw me, paused. It was Leora. She set her tote down, sat across. Her voice quiet. You can keep pretending you don't need help, or you can let someone stand beside you. She pointed at the empty seat. I looked at her, then at my daughter, then back. Long seconds passed. My pride bristled, but the ache in my shoulders said yes. I slid over. She touched my hand lightly. Warm. She said she had a spare room in her basement, heated, clean, safe. One night, then maybe more. I didn't say anything for a minute. Then I whispered, yes. I packed what little I owned later, loaded it into plastic bags. We drove to Leora's home. She didn't ask questions about why I had failed or why my family had shut me out. She just opened her door. Her basement was plain, lamps flickering, old quilts, a rug with moth holes. But there was space. The heater hummed. There was air that didn't sting my lungs. My daughter nuzzled into the quilt, warm and sleepy. That night, I let myself rest. Not sleep. Rest. Leora made soup. She offered a bowl. I accepted. Her kindness wasn't loud, but it roared in silence. Between spoonfuls, I thought, this is what survival looks like. Not collapsing alone, but letting someone else steady the ground beneath you. I pulled out a notebook. My hand trembled, but words came. She didn't know where we were, or why we were there, but she felt safe. And for now, that was enough. I closed the notebook, and for minutes I sat in stillness, listening to my daughter's breath. Outside, snow blanketed the street. Inside, something warmed, tiny, steady. But the world never forgets a broken woman, even when she starts to heal. They used my name to raise money. Now, I'll use mine to raise hell. I stared at the invitation on the kitchen table half an hour before dusk. The edges rattled from where I'd gripped the paper and set it back down. The Isolde Foundation Gala, it read, in glossy script, charity, supporting single mothers in need. My blood froze when I saw her name, Isolde's name, at the top. My heart hammered, because I knew what they were doing. They were me without credit, me without acknowledgement. Leora found me there, shoulders hunched over a cup of lukewarm tea in her living room. Rain tapped the roof like an impatient drummer. I showed her the invite. Do I go? My voice was low. The ache of wanting to prove something warred with the fear of being humiliated again. If they mention me, it'll be the story I told, but twisted to make them look good, she sighed. You don't need to say anything. Just show them you're still here. Her words lingered, offering both defiance and grace. I nodded, folded the invite, and left Leora's house. The sky was bruised with clouds, streetlights reflecting wet pavement. My daughter slept in the car seat in the back. I brushed her bangs aside and whispered, "We're going." It was nearly time to reclaim ground. The ballroom was opulent, crystal chandeliers dripping light, polished marble floors, Laughter that sounded soft but sharp. Women in dresses that glittered. Men in suits that smelled of fortune. Isolde stood on stage, a microphone in hand, as if this was the moment she'd written her whole life toward. She spoke about women like me, women who struggled, who rose. I saw her lips curve when she said, "I know what it's like to be unseen." They applauded. I felt unseen right there, on the edge of a room full of people who believed she had lived every word she claimed. She told a story about losing everything, about being abandoned, about growing up broken. I recognized parts. My nights in the Camry, my hunger, my fear. She made them hers. Not exactly, not in detail, but enough. Enough for their eyes to mist, enough for my cheeks to burn. After her speech, moving through hushed congratulations, people paused to shake her hand. I stood near a column, clutching my daughter, listening to women say, "You're inspiring," to Isolde. Mothers, pastors, local press, they smiled at Isolde with compassion. I wondered if they could see the pieces of my story behind her mask, or if they only saw what she let them see. On the ride home, cool air seeping through cracked windows, the bus smelled like wet coats and old leather. My daughter stared out the window. She tugged at my sleeve. "Grandma smiled at Aunt Isolde," she said, voice soft. "But not at us. Did we do something bad, Mommy?" Her face mirrored confusion and pain. I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "No, baby," I said, voice trembling. "You didn't do anything. She isn't always kind. But you're loved." I pulled her into a hug. The city lights blurred past. I held her hand until the rumble of the bus felt like a lullaby. Later, back in Leora's basement room, she handed me a beaten notebook, its cover scratched. She said, "Write. Not for them. Not for pity. For you." I opened it, the pages blank and new. I wrote every false claim she made, every tear I cried alone, every time I wished to hear someone say, "I see you." Pen to paper felt like reclaiming breath. I Googled Isolde Foundation that night, found donor lists, old speeches, some photos where familiar townspeople smiled next to her. Some of the names belonged in our family, neighbors, distant cousins, people who once waved at me as I walked past. I felt that they witnessed my erasure and still clapped. They buried me, but they forgot. I'm a seed. It was late when I snapped my laptop shut. The rain pounded on the roof, a lullaby in its own right. My daughter slept, chest rising steady. I touched her cheek and made a promise, not loud. Not about confrontation, but respect for truth, loving what was real. They used my name to raise money. Now, I'll use mine to raise hell. They used my name to raise money. Now, I'll use mine to raise hell. The morning sun filtered weakly through my bedroom window. A thin sliver of light across the carpet made motes of dust dance. I sat at the small kitchen table, baby asleep in the crib behind me, formula bottles half washed in the sink. I sipped lukewarm coffee, watching steam curl in the air. My hands shook, not from cold, but from realization. It was time to prove what I knew. I collected documents I had stashed in a plastic bin, birth certificates, old letters, Mom's ledger where she wrote down who borrowed money, who paid back or didn't. Among them was the copy of the trust I once thought meant safety. It was old, typed, with Isolde's name in bold among beneficiaries. I remember Mom reading it at the dinner table, leafing through pages as though she'd already decided my place, even before I said I was pregnant. Now, I drove out to the small-town notary public office I had found online. It had peeling paint, a faded sign, and one flickering light inside. I stood in line behind a man talking about his taxes. When it was my turn, I asked for a certified copy of the current trust. The clerk looked up, polite but sifting through emails, clicked her tongue. "I'm sorry, Miss Inch, but you're no longer listed." I blinked at the paper in her hands. The amendment's date. 5 days after I had given birth. Signature. Familiar cursive, too refined. Isolde's style, I thought, or someone hired to mimic it. My throat clenched. My baby in the back seat stirred. I closed my eyes for a moment and steadied myself. "Can I see the amendment itself?" I asked. She nodded, handed me a photocopy. The ink looked fresh, the edges crisp. I left without saying more. Back in the car, I held the paper under the dome light, fingers tracing that new clause where my name was stricken. This matter is solely your responsibility. Only my responsibility. I thought of Isolde smiling in crystal lights at the gala, her arm looped through a sponsor's elbow, everyone clapping for her. She took everything I ever did and said it was hers. Now, even the safety net of family property had been yanked from beneath me. That afternoon, I scribbled a letter. With trembling but determined hand, I addressed it to Mom, Isolde, and Father. I didn't demand money, just fairness. I asked for an acknowledgement, return my name, restore shared inheritance, or at least provide what was promised. I sealed it in an envelope, addressed it. My daughter slept upstairs. I wore my smallest boots, zipped my coat. I carried the envelope like a torch. At their address, I slipped it through the mail slot, heart pounding in my ears. Later, through Leora's phone, I caught wind of something awful. I overheard Mother and Isolde laughing in hushed tones, something like, "She thinks paper will fix what she's broken. Let her try." The words, when replayed in my mind, stung sharper than any slap. Mother's laugh was brittle, Isolde's gaze cruel. They believed I was naive. They believed my voice could be erased with a signature. Weeks passed. Every day I marked the calendar, waiting for them to respond. I mulled over every meeting, every moment I stood alone. I didn't waste energy on bitterness. I was learning precision, gathering names, copying signatures, collecting witnesses. I talked to Mr. Dalton, retired estate attorney Leora had introduced, quiet, sharp-eyed man with more wrinkles than smiles. He looked at my documents, paused, then said, "The ink is recent. There is a case here, heiress." That moment, it lit something I didn't know I had. One evening, I found a letter my daughter had drawn and tried to mail to Grandma. She taped a crayon heart on the envelope and asked me to stamp it. I left the stamp off. She asked, "Mommy, if Grandma loves me, why didn't she send it back?" I swallowed. "Some people don't know how to respond," I said, voice firm but sad. I threw her arms around me. She smelled like baby powder and clean laundry. I realized that protecting her meant stopping the begging. Late that night, I felt the weight of all the silence. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about signatures, threats, people who thought of me as fragile. I typed up demand letters, draft notices, reference legal codes. When Mr. Dalton sent the first subpoena to their attorney, I felt the shift. This was no longer just about my heart. It was about dignity. Their paper faded, but I was standing in truth. They erased my name from their papers. Now I'm signing theirs with a storm. They erased my name from their papers. Now I'm signing theirs with a storm. The summer sky pressed hot and heavy as I stood outside the courthouse with Mr. Dalton beside me. The entrance doors were glass, reflecting the afternoon light, but what I saw in them was blurred, the shadow of doubt, the weight of every moment that led here. My daughter clung to my hand, her other resting on my hip, wrapped in a sweater for the air conditioning inside, shielded but aware. I inhaled, letting every memory settle behind me. This was more than a hearing. It was reckoning. Inside, Isolde walked in first, surrounded by lawyers who looked polished. Designer shoes, crisp shirts, calculate smiles. Mother hovered behind her, pearls glittering. Father's face was rigid, eyes shifting away. The waiting room smelled of old carpet and nervous cologne. I felt a tremor in my belly, not cold, but anticipation. Mr. Dalton gave me a steady nod. "Remember," he whispered, "we have proof." When the judge called us in, the air in the courtroom tightened. Isolde's posture turned regal. My heart pounded as the judge introduced the case, the amended trust, allegations of forged documents, omitted beneficiaries. Then the file opened. My eyes caught the signature. Too perfect, too cautious. Exactly the way I remembered Isolde's handwriting when she practiced address labels for her wedding. Mr. Dalton stood. He placed evidence before the court, time-stamped emails, one sent from Isolde's account, days after my daughter's birth, requesting that the trust be amended. Handwriting samples from letters and old school reports compared side by side. The judge leaned forward. Mother's hands trembled in her lap. Isolda's jaw tightened. There was a moment of silence, a blade slicing through the polished veneer of the courtroom. "These documents warrant full investigation," the judge said. My chest tightened. Validation. What I had suspected, what I'd feared, was being named aloud. Triumph pulsed through me, even as I saw the betrayal in Mother's downturned lips. Later that evening, Isolde went live on social media. Her face framed by extravagant lighting, the ambiance of wealth behind her smile. Her tone was apologetic, distanced. "I tried to love her, but some people can't be helped," she said, her eyes not meeting any viewer. She painted me as unstable, jealous, unhinged. Public statements that skimmed over facts. But the backlash began before she finished speaking. Comments, shares, hashtags, half the audience questioned her version. Some admitted knowing hints, the revised documents, the missing inheritance, whispers about family secrets. I didn't reply. Words, I realized, were being used as weapons. Liora called that night. "They weaponize words. I'll use truth, but not on their terms." I sat in the dim light of our kitchen, daughter asleep upstairs. I listened to crickets outside, the hum of the refrigerator. I drafted notes in my phone, things that mattered. Witnesses who saw Isolde signing that amended document, the notary who confirmed she had requested it, emails with the clerk confirming removal of my name. Next morning, I found my daughter at the kitchen table, drawing a picture. Two women shouting, faces distorted, one larger, one smaller. The child sat in a corner, her crayon lines jagged, heavy. She didn't look up when I came into the room. I swallowed. My throat was thick. "Mommy, why are they always mad at you?" Her voice barely above a whisper. I knelt beside her, hand in her hair. "They're upset because I stopped letting them hurt me," I said softly. I hated that tears crept in, but I held them back. I didn't want her seeing me break. Not now. She looked at me, brows furrowed. I pulled her close. "You're safe. I'll always protect you." I walked to Leora's basement room later, carrying the child, carrying every weight I'd carried since birth. Leora made us herbal tea in mugs that didn't match. The steam rose. The room smelled of old books and mothballs. I closed my eyes and felt resolve tighten inside me. Not rage, but determination, the kind that pulls you upright, that shapes your spine. I realized the world could see my story now, not just hers. I didn't need the world to love me. I just needed them to see who they were cheering for. The late summer air hung thick with anticipation as I stepped into the courtroom. The scent of polished mahogany, old books, and nervous sweat clung to the room like history. Every seat was filled, reporters, extended relatives, strangers drawn in by curiosity. People stared. Some tried not to. I didn't flinch. I gripped my daughter's hand tighter and walked straight ahead, each step like a declaration. I wasn't here to plead. I was here to be heard. Isolde sat up front. Of course she did. Posture straight, lips pressed into a diplomatic smile, her lawyer beside her flipping through a tabbed binder, brimming with smirking confidence. Their eyes told the story they thought they'd already won. And there, just behind them, sat Mother. Her pearls glinted under the fluorescent lights, and her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of her seat. Whether from guilt or fear, I couldn't say. Maybe both. She looked older than I remembered, like years had finally caught up with her silence, but I didn't look back at her. I kept my eyes forward. My heart thudded, not from fear but from something deeper, something hot and cold at the same time. Fury shaped like justice. That morning, I'd woken before the sun. The apartment was still. Outside, streetlights flickered and garbage trucks hissed down the road. I sat at the kitchen table, nursing bitter coffee from a chipped mug, rehearsing everything I needed to say. I went over my notes, the court filings, the emotional gymnastics they would attempt to twist the truth. The recording sat in the center of the table, just beside my hand, a simple device, nothing fancy, but what it held, it carried decades, a voice, her voice, a confession, whispered like a ghost. We had to give everything to Isolde. Eris was always too sensitive. She wouldn't last anyway. It wasn't scripted, it wasn't rehearsed. It was real. I didn't find it. She gave it freely once, in a moment she thought would disappear into the void of memory. But I had saved it, buried it for years, unsure if it was proof or poison. Now I knew. It was neither. It was truth. Undeniable. I got my daughter dressed, fed her toast with jam, tied her shoes. Her teddy bear, well-loved and patched in the belly, went into her arms like armor. I kissed her forehead, then looked Leora in the eye when she handed me the recorder. Her voice was quiet but strong. "They can't deny what they filmed themselves saying," she said, and she was right. By the time we arrived at the courthouse, I had anchored myself. Fear had no room here. I strapped my daughter into the bench beside me and held her hand through the procedural start of the hearing. The judge, a man with weary eyes but an observant demeanor, called it an emergency custody motion, filed by Isolde, backed by Mother. Their claim? That I was unstable, irresponsible, financially unfit, emotionally erratic. Their lawyer spoke as if reading from a tabloid. Eviction notices, utility shutoffs, late credit card payments. A pattern of failure, he called it. A danger to the child. I sat still, jaw clenched. He didn't mention how I worked 2 jobs while pregnant. He didn't mention how I fed my child first, every time. How I'd held her during fevers while waiting for Medicaid paperwork to come through. He didn't mention how silence, not poverty, broke me. When it was my turn, I rose slowly. The courtroom was quiet. My daughter climbed into my arms. I carried her to the podium. I could feel them watching, waiting for me to stumble. But I didn't. "I'm not perfect," I said. "But I am present. And I tell the truth." From the inside pocket of my coat, I pulled the recorder and pressed play. Mother's voice filled the room, trembling, soft, unmistakable. We had to give everything to Isolde. Eris was too sensitive. She wouldn't last anyway. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Isolde's face drained of color. Mother's hand went to her mouth. Even the judge paused, pen still midair. The words weren't loud, but they echoed. Decades of exclusion wrapped up in one sentence. A sentence I had waited my whole life to hear spoken aloud. Not just to me, but to everyone. The moment ended, but the impact did not. After the hearing, everything moved fast. The recording leaked online, someone had captured it from their phone, and within hours, it was everywhere. Daughter erased, custody battle sparks, public outcry. Too sensitive to last, a family's audio scandal goes viral. People heard the tape. People listened, and for once they believed me. Not the philanthropist, not the polished charity speaker, me. Online threads exploded. Women from across the country shared their stories. My mother always said I was the dramatic one. My sister could do no wrong either. I was erased, too. The phrase "daughter erased" trended for 2 days. Sponsors began quietly pulling out of Isolde's nonprofit. Donations stalled. Her once shiny reputation dulled under scrutiny. A journalist dug into trust fund allocations. Mother refused interviews. Father retreated even further into the shadows. But I didn't celebrate. There was laundry to fold. My daughter had a runny nose. The fridge hummed. Life didn't pause for justice. I felt tired, but lighter. One evening, while I was wiping down the kitchen counters, my daughter showed me a drawing she made. 2 women stood yelling at each other. In the corner, a small figure crouched, hugging her knees. I recognized the crayon colors, the tears in her lines. "Why did Grandma say you were weak?" she asked, eyes wide. I paused. My breath caught in my throat. "Because she never really listened," I whispered. "But you? You will always hear me." She nodded and leaned into me. I held her tight, heart aching in all the places healing begins. Later that night, I stood at the window of our apartment. The city hummed below. Sirens, buses, the occasional bark of a dog. I thought of how far I had come. Of all the nights I'd cried silently. Of how many years I spent trying to earn love from people who only knew how to withhold it. And now? Now the world wasn't just watching me, they were listening. And I had nothing to prove anymore. I didn't need the world to fall in love with me. I didn't need to be their hero or their tragic survivor. I just needed them to stop applauding the people who broke others and called it love. I just needed them to see who they were cheering for. And this time, they chose right. The courtroom was packed, shoulder to shoulder with reporters, family members, and people who had come to witness what they thought might be drama. But this wasn't a show. This was my life, laid bare in sworn statements, journal entries, voice recordings, and memories I could never rewrite. The kind of truth that doesn't ask for applause, the kind that demands to be spoken. My daughter sat beside me, her small hands gripping the teddy bear I'd patched up last winter. One ear was stitched back on in uneven thread, and its belly was lopsided, but she loved it that way. That bear had seen more than most adults. Its faded fabric reminded me, even things once broken can still be whole. I wore a navy dress with flat shoes and a plain cardigan, no makeup, no earrings, just my old wedding band still on my finger, an anchor to the past I had long since outgrown. The ring felt heavier than usual, like it knew this would be its last day on my hand. Across the aisle, Isolde sat poised like a statue carved from ice, immaculate as ever, not a hair out of place. Silk scarf, designer heels, a soft smile perfected for the camera lenses that blinked like eyes in every direction. Mother sat behind her, draped in pearls, eyes red-rimmed but dry now. Father, cold and distant as always, kept his eyes on the floor tiles like they might suddenly spell out a different ending. The judge entered. All rose. When we were seated again, the room quieted, tense as a held breath. The judge's voice cut through the silence. There is a clear, documented pattern of emotional neglect, coercion, and manipulation, he began, flipping through a binder thick with exhibits and affidavits. And this court finds that these actions were not only unethical, but damaging to the well-being of the minor child involved. I gripped the edge of the table, my lungs barely expanded, my throat burned from holding back tears I didn't want to cry in public. And therefore, the judge continued, full legal custody is granted to Eris Langley. The words echoed louder than a gavel. I closed my eyes for just a second. In that breath, the weight of years lifted, even if only a little. I looked down at my daughter, her gaze locked on the judge like she understood more than she should at her age. She squeezed the bear tighter. The judge wasn't finished. In addition, Ms. Isolde Langley and Mrs. Celeste Langley are hereby ordered to issue a formal public apology within 10 business days. They will also complete 200 hours of community service, specifically within local shelters serving single mothers and domestic abuse survivors. There was a shuffle of disbelief on the other side of the room. I didn't flinch. They could call it shame. I called it consequence. Outside, the media swarmed like bees to sugar. Eris, how does it feel to be vindicated? Do you have a message for your family? Will you sue for damages? I didn't answer. My daughter tugged on my sleeve. I knelt beside her and whispered, "We're safe now, love." She pressed her cheek to mine, soft and warm. I didn't need headlines, but they came anyway. Philanthropist family fraud scandal. Mother wins custody battle against socialite sister. Charity ties severed as sponsors, Flee Langley Foundation. Screenshots surfaced. Text messages, emails, journal entries. Voice recordings were leaked. The world saw behind the velvet curtain, manipulation, silence, and a web of control spun tightly over the years. One by one, the threads unraveled. Isolde's sponsors vanished like smoke. The foundation's glossy website went dark. The polished mask cracked. I didn't watch the downfall. I didn't need to. I skipped the gala where Isolde once held court as the family's golden child. Instead, I went home to our small apartment with creaky floors and fridge drawings of stick figure girls and stars. One picture showed us in a forest, holding hands, with a sign that read, "Looking for kindness." I tucked my daughter into bed. She asked for a story, one of the ones I make up. This one was about a mother who found a baby bird that had fallen from its nest. Not her baby. Not one she planned for, but she chose to love it anyway. My daughter smiled in her sleep. The next morning, I drove back to the house where I grew up. It looked smaller, or maybe I had just grown too much to fit inside it now. The front porch still leaned to one side, and the flower pots were cracked, half-dead petunias spilling out. I stood on the steps for a long time before I knocked. Mother answered. Her eyes swelled with tears immediately. Eris, she said, voice trembling. I thought I was protecting you from yourself. I was scared. I didn't know how to help. She kept saying it, again and again, like repetition would turn it into truth. I stared at her, silent for a while. Then I said the thing I had never said. I'm not your child to fix, Mama. I didn't need saving. I needed you to see me, and you chose not to. You didn't protect me. You protected your silence. Her face crumpled. She reached out. Her hand shook. I didn't take it, but I didn't hate her either. That was too easy, too simple. What I felt was deeper. Sadness. For her, for me, for all the versions of our family that never existed. I turned and left, not in anger, in peace. That night, back at the apartment, I sat at the old desk we found on Craigslist. Its legs creaked and one drawer stuck, but it held space for memories. I pulled out a sheet of paper, lit a small candle, and wrote a letter, not to them, but to the little girl I used to be. You were never too much. They were just never enough. I folded the page, held it to the flame. The paper curled, turned to ash, smoke curling toward the ceiling like a whispered goodbye. I watched it float and disappear, and with it, a weight lifted. Fall arrived in full color. Amber leaves, chilly breezes, pumpkins glowing on stoops. I took my daughter to the fair. We ate caramel apples and cotton candy. She rode the tilt-a-whirl, curls bouncing, eyes bright. She screamed with laughter. I stood still and let myself feel it all. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need their apology. I didn't need their version of me. All I ever needed was permission to live. And it was mine to give. Some scars stay, but they don't get to write my story anymore. The morning sun filtered gently through gauzy white curtains, casting soft golden stripes across the scarred wooden floor of my new apartment. It was nothing fancy, an old unit in a neighborhood that didn't show up on glossy postcards, but it was safe. And for once, it was ours. Mine and my daughter's. A small island of peace carved out of years of storm. She sat at the window seat, her nose pressed to the cool glass, watching leaves spiral like dancers in the autumn wind. She had wrapped herself in a blanket faded by time and washed so many times it had lost its original color. Still, she looked content, eyes wide with wonder. I watched her while I poured cinnamon tea into 2 chipped mugs I found at Goodwill. A small stack of mismatched plates sat in the sink, evidence of our morning pancakes, slightly burned but devoured with sticky joy. The furniture was secondhand, some of it wobbly, some of it awkward in shape or color, but every piece felt like a brick in the foundation of a new life. The couch sagged in the middle, the dining table tilted slightly to the left, and the rug in the hallway curled at the edges. Yet in all that imperfection, I found beauty, reclamation, survival, home. I sat down at the table, pulled my daughter into my lap, and for the first time in what felt like decades, I didn't feel like I was just surviving. I felt rooted. I felt like maybe, just maybe, this was peace. That afternoon, when she napped curled beside her stuffed rabbit, I opened the leather-bound journal I had avoided for months. Dust clung to the cover like it knew my hesitation. The first entry struck like a knife to the ribs. I kept looking for a mother in my mother. The rest of the sentence blurred through tears I hadn't planned to shed. Maybe it's time I become her. For me. I pressed the pen to the page. My hand shook. Memories surfaced uninvited. Childhood dinners eaten in silence. Eyes that flicked past me like I wasn't worth pausing for. Praise handed out to others but never me. Love used like a prize you had to win. My throat tightened. Then came a sound, giggling. My daughter's giggling. I turned to see her spooning syrup onto a plate of pancakes I'd left out. Her mouth and cheeks were sticky, her joy radiating through the room. I laughed, wiping my face. Healing, I realized, tasted like that. burnt edges and sweetness all tangled together. That evening, I found an envelope sitting on the kitchen counter. It wasn't there that morning. I stared at the handwriting, hesitant, wavering. Familiar. It was my mother's. My name was written on the front, like a scratch in the paper. I sat down. Inside the envelope was a letter. Apologies, vague gestures toward the idea of reconciliation, talk of fresh starts. But no ownership, no specifics, no mention of the long nights I cried alone. No recognition of how she stood silent when I needed her most. Only a polite hope that we could move forward, as though nothing had happened. I read it once, then folded it back up, slid it into the drawer where I kept old batteries and birthday candles. I didn't reply. My phone stayed silent. And for the first time, I realized silence wasn't just something used against me. It could also be a boundary. My boundary. A few days later, I walked into Eleanor's women's shelter. I wasn't looking for recognition. I went because I needed to give something back, because someone at the front desk had recognized me from that article in the local paper. She reached out, shaking my hand gently. "You don't have to be loud to be heard," she said. "You just have to speak the truth once." It struck something in me I didn't know was still tender. The room smelled of detergent and clean bedding, of something starting over. I helped distribute warm blankets and sorted through donated coats. I whispered words of encouragement. Small prayers passed like secret notes between broken hearts. My daughter sat nearby, quietly coloring houses with crooked chimneys and smiling suns. She kept drawing hearts in the windows. And in that moment, it hit me. I wasn't just healing. I was building legacy. Not with money or status, but through kindness, through survival, through the choice to be better than what was done to me. Our little apartment grew fuller each day, not with things, but with stories. Books lined the shelves, memoirs by women who had survived too much, poems about leaving and staying, letters written to daughters lost or never born. We read together every night. One evening, she chose a picture book with a girl standing alone in a forest. She looked up at me and asked, "Is she brave, Mommy?" I wanted to cry, but I smiled. "Yes," I said softly. "Even alone, she is brave." She curled into my side, her small hand gripping mine. I felt the steady beat of her breath against my ribs. Later that night, after she had gone to bed, I walked to the window. Rain tapped lightly against the glass. The street below shimmered with silver reflections, streetlights dancing in puddles. I lit a single candle. The glow flickered against the walls, soft and warm. I stood there and let myself remember the courtroom, the judge's face when I told my truth, the headlines that bore his name and not mine. The nights I rocked my daughter alone in a shelter bed, the echo of slammed doors, the sting of voicemails never returned, the hollow silence after betrayal. But I also remembered that moment I picked up the journal, the moment I said, "Enough." Justice, I realized, doesn't always arrive in a courtroom. Sometimes it's waking up to peace. Sometimes it's whispering to your child in the quiet, "You are safe now." Sometimes it's choosing not to answer a letter. Sometimes it's simply surviving. I was the storm they tried to silence. I was the silence they built their walls against. And now, I am the calm after everything. Sometimes, the people who are supposed to love us the most are the ones who cause the deepest wounds. But healing doesn't always come from apologies. It comes from reclaiming our voice, our peace, and our future. What would you do if your own family turned their back on you at your lowest? Let me know in the comments. And if this story spoke to you, hit that subscribe button, because there's so much more to come. Real stories, real pain, real strength.